Okay, so today we're talking about this is the second part of the practical side of brokering. So I'm going to get into that and about how to take the mortgage application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean on you guys a little bit today. I know that we've got various levels of experience here amongst our team, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to lean a little bit on Brent and maybe a little bit on Bobby Lee and Dean. You've got experience within the industry as well. Because what I want to do is I want to kind of get your guys' sense on the various kind of parts and pieces of going through the mortgage application process. So again, talking a little bit about technology, talking a little bit about the completion process, and then lender relations. So we're going to touch on a little bit about those three things, but more specifically, I want to get a sense from Brent as to, in terms of technology, what do you use? What do you find useful? And how are you doing that? So for instance, if I'm taking a mortgage application, Jamie and I talked about this a little bit this morning. I'm typically either going to be sending out a client experience, or so that's for people that are not wanting to meet, or I'll see people in the office, or I'll talk to them on the phone. And if I'm doing those things, how am I taking the application? So Brent, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell me about how you see this process and what works best for you.
Let me unmute myself first.
Yes, please.
For me personally, it's two things. And two different scenarios, obviously. The client experience, if I need somebody to take the time to do it, if they're maybe it's one partner, they don't have the other one with them, don't have all the information available. I'll send out the client experience to them, let them fill it out at their own pace. So I rely pretty heavily on that process. Now, if it's somebody's ready to go, we're ready to take an application over the phone, then I'm actively inputting it as I go into Velocity. I've started a new application for them. I'm actively doing it. And the reason I do that, it's a bit of falling back into the Dustin Woodhouse method, but the reason I'm doing it is basically because then I know that at the end of the call, I have pretty much all the information in front of me. I haven't missed anything. I can give them accurate numbers right on that call based on what I'm seeing at the time. So I do rely on two different ways, obviously. Very rarely will I do anything on paper. I may make some notes to myself, but I'm actively inputting things directly into the system. I'm using the note function in Velocity as well, if there is something that I need. And then from there, right away, I'm able to send out a document request to them, just based on the phone call. And then if it's something where they're doing the client experience, I have my smart conditions set up. So it's going to go through that application and it's going to say, okay, this person is an hourly employee. I need a letter of employment from them. I need a pay stub, and it's going to send that to them right away. So I do rely on that stuff pretty heavily. I think when it comes to smart conditions and things like that, I think it's super important to take the time to set them up properly, because there are some in there that default that don't make a lot of sense. I think there's one in particular. It asks for a free and clear title on every application until you go in there and you edit it yourself. So I set those up myself. I got rid of all the default ones, just so that way, again, it's a control thing. You want to make sure you know what's going to your clients. So I do rely on the smart conditions pretty heavy.
So Brent,
and the client experience.
I just want to ask you a little bit, because I think that what you've mentioned is interesting, in that you've talked about smart conditions. And as new brokers, I think one of the things that Jamie and I kind of came to the realization this morning was that the process of taking an application, just knowing the questions to ask, like what are the various parts of that application, that is kind of one part of becoming a really good broker, is that you're going to figure out what are the bits and pieces that I need to know about the client. The second part, which I think comes to the smart conditions question, is what are the bits of the underwriting that I'm going to do once I've got the details? And I think, so for the new brokers that are on this call, what's really cool is we can get really good at the first part. And that's kind of the first part about figuring out brokering is, okay, what do I need to know about this client? And then the second part is, how do I verify the things that have just been told to me. And what's really cool about velocity and what Brent is getting at is that the smart conditions are basically a way of the program velocity underwriting a little bit for you, knowing certain things. So if we know that a person is employed and is an hourly employee, then we can have velocity automatically request certain documents. So for instance, it might request a letter of employment or a pay stub. And those are things that you might get it to do. But there's certain things that it might do that you are like, no, I don't want to have it automatically request a letter of employment. Maybe you don't want it to do that. And that's okay, as long as it's part of your process and you kind of say, okay, I think I want to review this and then request the stuff. So Brent, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you've gotten the smart conditions to really work with you?
Well, I think it's just over time, you really realize, the different, like you say, the different pieces. So you're going to figure out as you go that if somebody's talking to you about a file, and you're going to realize that if you're self-employed, you need XYZ. You're going to figure out if they're an employee, you're going to need XYZ. If it's a refinance, you're going to need XYZ. So as you go, you're going to figure these things out. And a lot of it can be taught, right? Obviously, Pete, I didn't know any of that stuff when I first started brokering. And Pete and I went through a lot of that stuff using his rule of three, that you're getting three things for different things. And so when you kind of have that knowledge, which is nice because you can do that on your own, basically on your own time, you can figure out exactly what you're going to need for documentation and you can set it up from there. Which is kind of what I've done. It's just based on previous experience. You kind of realize what you're going to need to plug in there. And you're going to have to do a little bit of homework, obviously, to kind of figure that out in terms of how it fits with lender policy and what they're going to want to see and what they're going to need to verify. Yeah, I don't know, Pete, does that answer your question at all? I don't even know what your question was at this point. I'm just rambling.
I think the cool part is that you've kind of told us a little bit about how you operate and what your process is in order to get that. Because last time we talked a little bit about, our, as brokers, how we present ourselves to the clients to kind of gain the trust. We do a little intro, we kind of tell us a little bit about ourselves, and then we start to get into that application. And it's always kind of interesting to kind of see how different brokers approach this. There's no right way, as we talked about last time, like every client is a little bit different. So you might have a client that is super comfortable on the phone, great. You might have a client that is excellent with technology, awesome. You might have a client that only wants to see people face to face, also good. But if you've got all those different types of clients, you have to figure out how is the best way and the most efficient way for you to do that. And so, practice a little bit, like really get to know the application system. And this is kind of where technology, so like I've said that technology is kind of like one of the pillars upon which we're talking about every time. Technology doesn't have to necessarily be velocity. You could easily say, I'm going to take notes, because I always take notes, and I'm taking notes about exactly what we're talking about. I'm learning every day. And taking notes I know it's actually something that Brent does a lot. And you'll see this during a lot of lender meetings, and Brent does a lot of research. But that's the kind of thing that it's not a bad thing. And whether you take notes on a computer or you take notes on a page, or you take applications on a page, I honestly don't care what bit of technology you use. There's nothing wrong with this, but as long as it works.
I agree, Pete. And that is one of the big things. Like, yes, of course I rely on technology, but I have notebooks and notebooks that are filled with different notes, whether it's from clients as I'm going through, whether it's from lenders, whatever it may be. Notes is such a big thing. I think technology is just there to enhance and ease our process, at a certain point. But you touched on something interesting, Pete, is kind of that transition to taking an application and in what format you're going to do it. I think a lot of that comes with time. And as you get comfortable on the phone with people, you're going to pick up right away what they're comfortable with. If you know right away that somebody's not comfortable with technology, then you're going to have to be prepared to take an application for them, in the moment or in person or whatever it is. But if you can sense that they're good to go and they're okay with all that stuff on their own, then absolutely, if you can rely on a client experience sent to them, by all means. But it just comes with time, and it comes with, kind of that practice with talking to people, and getting to know them. And like Pete says, everybody's individual. I mean, we all have our own individual styles and how we kind of elicit the responses that we're looking for, and kind of dictating where our direction of our application goes.
One of the things that Jamie and I talked about, because we went through taking an application using Velocity when someone's sitting in front of you. So I just mirrored my screen so Jamie could see what I was doing, and we did a little bit of that. And we talked last time about setting expectations. And I always find this is interesting because to me, I get a kick out of it. I don't know if I'm necessarily a shit disturber, or it's just something where I feel like I need to throw something unique in. But one of the bits we talked about last time was gaining trust, and having clients open up to you. And Jamie could attest to this. I said, I set an expectation for how long this application is going to take. And typically, if you guys were to set that expectation, you might say, well, this might be 15 to 20 minutes or 15 to 30 minutes. I don't like that. And I'll tell you why. Because people, they don't find it very, it's not quick enough. It's not going to be quick enough. Like if you set this 30-minute guideline, you can be like, you're going to have people tune out because they're like, I can't do that. I feel like it's like when you walk into a car dealership and they're like, oh, this is just going to take a few minutes. And then you're there for the whole day. Like, it's like, no, this is not good. So what I said to Jamie is make up a number that is slightly small, use a prime number. And I don't know why I feel like prime numbers, just because they're unique. They're just a really interesting number, but make it kind of like, if someone says, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to do an application. It's going to take us about 7 minutes. People think that 7 minutes is kind of funny because it's like, well, first off, there's no way you're going to get through this in 7 minutes. And second off, like, why 7? Why not 5 or 10 or right? Or use 19 or use some other number, but use some weird number because it makes people laugh. And as soon as they laugh, they'll start to relax. And when they relax, they're okay with giving you information. So it's a weird thing, but use little quirks, little kind of psychological quirks. Read books about weird stuff. Throw that weird stuff into your conversation because it really is disarming, and I think it makes clients more comfortable, and that is good for any application.
So, Pete, one of the things as I'm going through an application with somebody, I don't actively say we're taking an application. I mean, we're having a conversation. I mean, tell me about what you do for work. They'll explain, okay, how long have you been doing that for? They'll explain. So as we're going, it's just a conversation. It's not a formal thing, because as soon as you turn into this formal conversation with somebody, that's what it becomes, right? It becomes a very rigid and standardized thing. So as you go, you develop kind of your own flow. Tell me what do you have for vehicles? What do you have for that type of thing? Just keep it as casual as you can with them while getting all the information you need. You don't want to get their guard up in any way. You don't want them to feel like they're being grilled. And as long as you keep in mind that you're dealing with some of their most sensitive information, then they're automatically going to want to be a bit guarded with it. So you have to kind of keep it as conversational. I found anyways, you have to keep it as conversational as you can. Keep it as light as you can. Don't make it into a heavy conversation. And I tell people right at the start that we're going to get to know each other extremely well by the time this is over. And you do. I mean, it's just the nature of it. But for me, it's all about just keeping it as light as you can, as much of a conversation. Don't just drill it down like they're sitting across the desk from somebody in their bank where that's what they're doing. They're telling the banker information, the banker's plugging into the computer. I mean, I'm doing that actively in the background, or I'm taking notes as we go. But at the end of the day, it's not a formal thing. It's not a intimidating process. I mean, you want to keep it as light as you can and keep them as comfortable as you can, because it is a lot of information that you're digging into. So it's just kind of my own personal way of dealing with it, is keep it as conversational as possible.
I love that you brought that back, because when Jamie and I did the application this morning, I was very I was regimented. It was like, here's the first part, here's the second part, because I wanted to really go through what the different parts of the app look like. Because sometimes like Velocity can be really daunting. There's a lot of stuff to put in. And Bobby Lee, you might already be used to kind of taking a bunch of apps from your work at the credit union. So like you kind of know, and Dean, you're the same. You kind of know all the stuff that you need to get. So I find that there is both the science, so like the black and white parts, right? Here's the bits and pieces that we need. And sometimes we need to go through the science of it. Once you know the science, you can get into the art. Because unless you know the science, unless you know the black and white, what are the bits and pieces that we need, it's hard to get the art side out. And so I love what you're saying, Brent. The fact that you want to have a conversation is good. Know the science well enough, know the application well enough that you can turn this into a conversation. And also, you're going to get to the point where you know the science, you know the black and white well enough that not only do you turn into the art of the conversation, but every time you hear a response, that forms the basis of the next question. Because sometimes, like when you're having a conversation, you're like, "Oh my God, I'm not even hearing what they're saying. I'm just getting an answer down, and I don't know, right? Like it's not even cluing in." I find a really good example of this is this is going to go back to when I was a soccer referee. When I first started refereeing, everything was about the rules. So rules, like just figuring out the it's called the laws of the game in soccer, but figuring out the rules is a whole challenge in itself. But then being able to actually apply the rules and know what's coming next, that is very much the art. That's the, like, how do you figure it all out? And you're under such a high stress, which is just like what we have when we're taking an application. Even though it's like we're sitting in a desk, in a chair at a desk, we're in a fairly comfortable environment. It's still stressful because we're dealing with high numbers and a lot of important information. So knowing that, okay, I've figured out what this application looks like. I know what the questions are that I'm going to be asking. Now to actively be listening to the answers to the questions and knowing how those answers affect the next question. So for instance, if someone says, that they already have a mortgage or that they already own a home, then your question is, what are we doing? Are we refinancing? Are we remortgaging? Are we transferring? Are we adding someone to the mortgage? Like there's a whole bunch of questions that derive from the fact that they already have a place. Are they selling? Are they buying another place? Are they buying a rental? So there's all these questions that kind of stem from that. And again, you don't have to necessarily know all the various ways that the conversation can go, but just kind of having a sense that, okay, there's kind of the black and white parts to this industry. So is it a purchase? Is it a refi? Is it a transfer? So I always say, Brent says this, I always do everything in threes. I don't know why. It's the whole Martha Stewart thing. Everything's in threes. That's all I can remember. So if I do three things, purchase, refinance, or switch, transfer, perfect. It's one of those three things. And when I hear someone say, I've already got a home, then I'm already thinking, okay, are they buying another home? So that's purchase. Is it a refi? Or are they just moving an existing mortgage from one lender to another? So these are all the things that you're going to do over time. And again, that's that active listening. So that's really cool. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Dean, you've worked within a nationally recognized lender. We won't say BMO. Oh, no, we can say BMO. Well, you worked at BMO. You also worked at TD. So tell me a little bit about how your process of kind of gathering an application with one of those bigger lenders, how does that compare to back then? And how does it compare to what you do today?
It could be all over the place, it seems. What I found, and it was a little bit different. So quick background, like TD was smaller business banking. So typically smaller size loans, often personal loans, credit cards, things like that. With the commercial lending with BMO, it got a lot more complex. But it would depend. So I found like with TD, it was more transactional, kind of how you described, like the client would come in for a specific appointment time. They'd bring what information they had. You plug in everything you could as fast as you could into the system, see if you could get yourself far enough to get some documents printed, the application printed, consent signed and everything. And then towards the end of my time there, you might even be able to get an automated decision pretty quickly, or sometimes not. But you have to kind of get a feel for the scenario, I found. And sometimes it really was just getting to know the person and getting comfortable with them so that you could tell them exactly what they do need to bring in, because they might not have brought anything. With the commercial banking, it was similar, but just more complex. It would often be like a several week long process just to kind of sometimes even get documents together from the accountants. I don't know if that's kind of what you're looking for, but what I found so far with the processes is that the client experience, and I mentioned this in the call last time, I love it. And it makes it so simple. And so far, I have yet to not be able to just say, hey, I'm going to send you something. I might change the wording because I don't like the word application in there either. I'm going to send you something to get the information going. Just enter everything you can, get it back to me. And then I'll come back with some questions and we'll dig a little bit deeper where we need to. So it seems like the initial conversations so far are more the relationship, trust building kind of thing. And then getting that information over to them, letting them fill it on their time, and then coming back. And then I have a better sense of their whole scenario to ask questions from.
Cool. I love it. So you can see that even coming from more of a fairly regimented institutional side to brokering, you're still kind of gathering the same information, but even just kind of seeing how that kind of institutional side is very transactional. And that is, to me, that's the opposite of what we want to do. And so this is where those deep conversations that Brent mentioned, so really being conversational, get to know the person. And this is where like you can be totally funny. I always, when I'm going through the list of assets and liabilities, this is my constant, like I'm always trying to, again, bring the guard down. So I will usually throw in, when we're talking about assets, I'll say, okay, so do you have bank accounts, vehicles, any Rembrandts? I don't know why I put Rembrandts in there. I don't even know anyone that owns a Rembrandt, which is probably why it's ridiculous. But I always throw that one in because people, they tend to kind of understand that we're looking for things that they might own. You could also say, grand pianos, right? Like say something that's silly that most people don't have. And if someone does have a grand piano, then you're like, oh, sweet. So do you play, or right? Like it creates the conversation. It gets the silliness out. It really kind of deepens your understanding of who that person is.
Pete,
yeah.
Pete, one of the sales techniques that we used at the credit union was it was called FORM, which stood for Family, Occupation, Recreation, and Motivation. So that was something that we instilled in every, meeting that we had with our members to get them, to know them a little bit better before we dug into an actual application. And regarding the client experience, I actually sent that to myself and opened it up to see exactly what the clients go through and got myself familiar with it before I started my first application.
That's exactly what Jamie and I just went through. We talked about do that. Send it to yourself to see what that client experience looks like, because then you have firsthand knowledge of what the clients are going to see. And this is such a horrible pun, but you'll see what the clients experience. What are they going to see? What do they get in their inbox? How do you click on that thing on the inbox? Does it make any sense when you click on it? Like, does it ask you for a blood sample? I don't know. Like if I don't ever do it, then I don't know what it's going to ask. So always take the time to do it for yourself, and don't just do it once. Like do it a whole bunch of times and put on the smart conditions, turn on the smart conditions, see what that does. Start answering the questions like you're some oil worker, or answer the question like you're a nurse. Like do a whole bunch of different scenarios. It honestly doesn't matter if you've got a bunch of crap in the system. It's good learning. And there's never, again, it's not going to be crap if you've learned something out of it. If you get stuff out of it, then do it. And I'm 100% supportive. So absolutely. And I love that acronym, by the way, Family, Occupation, Recreation, Motivation. It is good, because if you can tap into even one or two of those things with your client, you've developed a relationship that is so much deeper than typically most people get at any institution. So it's good to know that is kind of the stuff that's being taught. So,
and that's one of the big things, Pete, is we've all lived, we have life experience. We have things in common with people, that will come out as we go. Jamie, maybe you have a client that is a hockey player. your husband was a hockey player. I mean, you have that in common. You know, for me, maybe somebody's divorced. I have that in common with them at some point in life. You know, there's lots of different ways that you can connect with people. And it's finding those common grounds that's so important as you go. You know, maybe you have a similar hobby. Maybe maybe somebody collects old typewriters like Pete. You know, whatever it may be, you know, you're always going to find that common ground. And as you build that relationship with them, it's such an easier relationship if you have those things. I mean, it's just such an important piece to it. Also, that acronym is awesome. I love that.
I only have one typewriter, and it's not even in the office right now.
You know what, Pete? And I knew as soon as I said collecting, I didn't mean collecting, but maybe they are into old typewriters.
So I love technology, but I also like really old things. So I have an old typewriter that I will type. So my goal right now, so you guys know, is I want to get one of those little it's like a little imprinter thing that you use like with a wax seal. I want to get one of those made. I just don't know what I want to have made, because I want to do the wax seal so that when I do the typewriter thing, that I can do the wax seal to seal the letter and then send that off. Because I think that would be so cool.
I know someone that might be able to do that for you when you have a design.
Oh, cool. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Are we going back to medieval times here, Pete, or what?
I know, I totally am.
You can do your family crest.
What's even crazier is I think of this, and I took photos at a wedding earlier this year. It's another one of my hobbies. I do photography. I do one wedding per year. That's my max. And the bride and groom, they actually sent me a letter, and it had a hand-designed image. The groom was Japanese, and he has a lot of like old traditional Japanese things. And it is a hand-designed image with a lot of kind of fish, because they're both swimmers, and a lot of kind of Japanese traditional bits and pieces. But the letter itself was sealed with a wax seal. And I'm like, oh, this is so awesome. It's like my favorite thing. So anyway, but super unique, right? Like that, the clients will look at that and they'll be like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Just something that kind of sets you apart. So, okay, we've talked a little bit about what you guys do and what works in terms of taking the application. So I'm going to shift a little bit to some of the technical bits about what it is that we're taking. So you guys all know of the information that we're gathering during the application process, but what I wanted to show you today was what documents are we actually getting the clients to sign, and when are they signing these documents, because that is part of this whole process. A lot of people, they'll go through new brokering and they just don't know when to get something signed, or when something appears, or how does it appear. So I'm going to go through a bit of that today. And to do that, I'm going to share my screen, and I hope this all comes through properly. Okay. So you guys can kind of see my screen right now. I'm going to get rid of this. Okay. So this is simply a file folder into which Sue and I have our working files. So this is kind of like the list of files that we have on the go. And I'm going to show you one of the first things that we get clients to sign. So as we go through the process, we are going to gather an application from the client. And whether that application is taken online, or if it's in person, or if it is on the phone, one of the things that I will always follow up with, and it's important because it forms part of the consent that the client is giving you, is to do a client agreement. And I should have, if you guys have not received this client agreement from me in our Dropbox folder, if I haven't yet sent it to you, please let me know and I will make sure that you have this. But everyone within Dominion Lending Centers and White House Mortgages will have one of these forms. It's going to be specific to you guys here at the top. But what this form does is it gives us the consent and authorization to not only gather this person's application and information, but to retain it for the period of 7 years, to communicate with them electronically, for us to use the information to gather a credit bureau, to communicate the credit bureau and their information to a lender for the purposes of the mortgage. It allows us to order things like appraisals on their behalf. And then it says that we are able to receive compensation for working on their behalf for the process, for the mortgage. So in this case, so the question is, when the heck are we going to do this? Okay, so in most circumstances, if a client applies online, so the client experience, there is a button that the client checks on that application process that does this. That being said, I will always follow up with an actual written version of this that the clients will sign, whether that's through DocuSign like that one I showed you, or if it's handwritten, so if a person prints it out, then scans and emails it back. So I will always follow up. But remember, this is going to be early in the process. So a client agreement is done on that application. So when the person applies online, they check the box. If they're sitting in front of me, I print it out and I get them to fill it out right then. If they're on the phone, I will email them before I pull a credit bureau. So I'll email them the client agreement. This client agreement is super important to do it very, very early in the process, because I think I probably said it in one of our group broker meetings. It's always very difficult if you don't have this form. If a client decides not to go this route, they will typically never return your calls if you want to get this back. So do it early, just get it done. Again, also what it does is it shows you that the client is committed to you. When they sign this, they're saying, hey, I'm giving you another piece of information, another bit of consent. That means that I'm committed to doing stuff with you. So that's super important. So first little bit, this is the first document that typically, along with the application, this happens. All right. So then we're thinking, okay, we've done the application, we've got the consent. So typically as part of that application, we'll pull a credit bureau. So that kind of goes in the file. We will at that point gather a bunch of documents. So supporting documents that we will use for the underwriting purpose, for verifying income, verifying real estate details, down payment verification, anything like that. We're going to gather those supporting documents, and we submit the application to the lender. Now, that doesn't mean we're necessarily submitting the supporting documents, but we're submitting an application. So application gets sent in. At this point, we wait. So the underwriter is going to, kind of the hamster turns in the wheel. Underwriter gets through it and they say, hey, awesome, this looks great. Everything was in the file that we needed. Here's a mortgage commitment. So let's take a look at what a mortgage commitment would look like. And sometimes, just so you guys know, a mortgage commitment will be issued directly through Velocity. So it'll actually come in and it'll show up as one of the conditions within Velocity. Sometimes a mortgage commitment will come in through your email. So the underwriter will email you back. And sometimes it'll come through a portal. So for instance, First National has a portal that it might appear on, or CMLS, the lenders that use portals. It can vary. Just so you know, commitments aren't necessarily going to happen one way or the other. They'll get to you somehow. So what the heck does one look like? Hang on a second. I'm going to share my screen again. Yep.
Sorry, I had a question about title searches. Is it necessary for us to pull title searches?
Is it necessary? Only if the lender asks for it, I would say. And the reason I say it only if it's necessary is some lenders won't require a title search. Typically, we will see a title search required when a person has indicated that they don't have a mortgage, so the property is free and clear. So we just need the title search to confirm that that is in fact the case. But I wouldn't proactively go doing title searches. They're about $12, so it's not super expensive, but at the same time, if it's not an expense that you need to incur, then don't incur it.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay. So what does a mortgage commitment look like? Well, on this file, this is what it looks like. So a mortgage commitment, let me just kind of make this, but like that. Okay. So the mortgage commitment will have client details at the top, the current address, the subject property address, and then the servicing address. So where is communication going to go? We'll tell you about the loan amount, the rate and the term, amortization, principal and interest. So this is your mortgage payment. Estimated real estate taxes. So that's your property taxes. And it also tells you who is paying the property taxes. In this case, the lender is going to collect them. Tells you about the closing date and any other details that might pertain to the actual mortgage. So that's all in that first box. And then the second box is any conditions that they require. So here's the conditions specific to this file. What do we need? This could include your conditions for verifying income. It could include conditions for verifying property details, current mortgage details, anything to do with the down payment. That'll all be listed here. And then after that comes the standard mortgage terms. So this is kind of like, what does the lender do on every mortgage file? So it lists all those things out. Also tells you about prepayment privileges, payment flexibility, so different types of payments, weekly, biweekly, solicitor, so who is the lawyer going to be, or the notary, and what do they have to do? Tells you, again, some details about how First National collects and consents to background checks, and talks about their privacy policy. And here on the very last page is a signature for the client and a date. Some mortgage commitments will have a spot at the end of every page where they will initial, but in general, there's just one spot for a signature. So that is all that. That's what a mortgage commitment looks like. So this is received by us once the lender has approved the file. And then it's our job at that point to then go ahead and satisfy those conditions that were mentioned on the mortgage commitment. So we will then go and verify the income. So we'll look at what have they asked for and what have we already got in terms of documents so that we can submit those in. Again, when you submit those conditions, you may be emailing the underwriter, you might actually be sending it through a portal, or you might be, what's another option? That's probably it. It's going to be one of those two. Maybe fax. Just kidding. Don't fax it. Okay. So that's the mortgage commitment. But what's really interesting is that the mortgage commitment is not a standalone document. So I wouldn't necessarily just send a client a mortgage commitment. That's going to come hand in hand with a few other documents. One of those documents will be a disclosure statement, and that's a cost of credit disclosure. And what is going to happen is I'm going to show you what that looks like. But what's really funny is that I don't think I actually have one in that file. Isn't that great? I don't even have one in another file. Hang on. There's got to be one in here somewhere. Nope, not in that one. Okay, I'm going to go to some completed files because that's not, I can't find them in these ones.
Would you wait till after the appraisal before you sent that?
Okay, so good question. So first off, I want to find out why you'd ask that question, just so that everyone's aware of why we'd want to think of the appraisal.
In case the appraisal value came in different than what you were anticipating.
Right. So
it could amend your loan value.
Right. So if the appraisal comes in low, it could amend the total mortgage amount. So for instance, on a refinance, if you're trying to refinance to 80% and the appraisal comes in low, then obviously 80% of a lower amount is going to be lower. Therefore, if you're doing a bunch of documents, having the client sign, they're going to have to re-sign because now that the documents are different. It's a good question. Typically, when it comes to something like a purchase, most purchases will typically appraise at the purchase price. The only time I really worry about appraisals coming in lower than the purchase price is like what we had 6 months ago when things were absolutely nuts. Brent, you have an example of this, right? You had a purchase.
Yeah, I had a couple where the appraisal came in a little bit light. One was, it wasn't really a rural property, but it's a little bit rural. It had some acres to it. And basically came in $100,000 less than I needed. So that was ugly, but I mean, the clients were able to make up the difference. But again, it's just, when we're in that market, it's so unpredictable what's going to happen. That one's a little different because there was a restriction on how many acres they could use for the actual appraisal. Some few other things going on there, but yeah, it definitely it can happen.
So my answer to the question, Bobby Lee, is that I would probably order the appraisal right away. So for all of you guys, as soon as we get a commitment back that says an appraisal is required, that's the first thing you jump on, because appraisers are very busy and they're one potential bottleneck to a deal getting funded on time. I guess not even funded on time, but for us to be able to remove subjects, especially for a purchase, on time. Because typically we're left with a very short subject period. That could be some days. I mean, if we're down at the coast, some of these are 3 days. Around here, I typically ask for 2 weeks, so 10 business days. But if we know that is kind of our limit in terms of time, then we got to get on the appraisal. So remember, as soon as you get a commitment that says we need an appraisal, order it. Brent.
So here's a good example of that. I ordered an appraisal for a property. Their subject removal was on a Friday. I didn't get the results back from the appraisal until 4:30 on the Friday. And that's not a situation you want to be in. I mean, that's stressful as can be. So basically I'm sitting there refreshing my email every 2 seconds, waiting for this friggin' appraisal to come in. Fortunately, it appraised at value, so they're able to remove subjects. But if it wouldn't have come in at value, then we're in a whole different ball game, and it's a Friday afternoon, so very limited time to deal with it. So yeah, the sooner the better.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with you following up with the appraiser, like especially if they've said they're gonna have it complete on a certain day. If they don't have it to you on that day, following up with kind reminders is a good idea. So always be kind of conscious of the appraisal. But to answer your question, very, very long-winded way of getting here, Bobby Lee. I would do the signings assuming that the appraisal will come in at value, especially on a purchase agreement, because we want to make sure that the lender has signed off on everything so that we can do subject removal. But on a refinance, you can wait. Typically, a refinance, there's no big pressure. There's no big push to get something done. So on a refinance, I might wait to make sure that the value does come in at the amount, especially if we're pushed right to 80%, because then that can affect the amount. So just wait, and then once they're there, fine. If for whatever reason on a purchase the value does come in different, if it comes in higher, nothing changes, because the lender is going to go with the lower of the appraised amount or the purchase price. If the amount comes in lower, then you can have a discussion with the client as to how they're going to make up the difference. So for instance, if a person wanted to buy a property and they had put in an offer for $520,000, accepted, great, property appraises at $500,000 exactly, so it's $20,000 less. Depending on how much they put down as a down payment, they'll either have to make up the $20,000 or some portion thereof if for whatever reason the appraisal does come in low. Let's say they put down $120,000. That was going to be their down payment, so the mortgage was going to be $400,000. Well, if the property appraised at $500 instead of $520, they're still going to be putting down $120,000. The loan to value is going to change. It's because they're only going to say the value is $500,000. Therefore, it'll be 80% loan to value, so $400,000 divided by $500,000. But that doesn't affect the structure of that whole deal because we haven't made it insured, right? So the whole thing is, it might not affect the whole thing anyway. The client's still putting down $120,000. We're still in a spot where the rate hasn't changed, nothing has changed. It's all the same. The real big difference would be if you had a person who was buying with 5% down and the appraisal came in low. So let's say they were buying something that was $500,000. They had $25,000 to put down, and that $500,000 purchase actually appraised at $480,000. Well, now they'll only lend on $480,000, and 5% of $480,000 is like $24,000. So they're going to have to have a $24,000 down payment plus $20,000 because the appraisal has come in short by 20. Do you guys want me to put that on a whiteboard so you can see how I did that? I kind of did that in my mind, and no one. Does anyone want to see that? No. Okay.
Your writing is so bad, Pete. There's no point.
I know it's horrible. I'll show you here. I'm gonna do it really quickly for you. Okay.
Jacinda said a word. Yeah.
You guys got it? Okay,
Perfect.
good. Done. Okay. You guys got all that. So, so it can affect things. So instead of that person having to have a $25,000 down payment on a $500,000 purchase, if it comes in low, the appraisal comes in low at 480, they're now having to come in with a $24,000 down payment plus the additional 20 that came in short. So they have to have a $44,000 down payment. That's what happens when an appraisal comes low on an insured deal. So be very conscious of the kinds of deals that these could happen. And it's actually a really good thing to think about, because if that happens, then the client might actually say, I think I'm going to back out of this. We still have the subjects to be removed. If I now have to come up with a bigger down payment, maybe there's room for negotiation with the seller. Maybe they drop the price. You know, there's a bunch of things that happen at that point. So again, there's no point in getting documents signed unless everyone says, yeah, we're still going to go through. All make sense? Okay, so we talked about the mortgage commitment, and I couldn't find another document to attach to it, which was the disclosure statement. So I've dug up an old disclosure statement here. All right, so what does a disclosure statement look like? So a disclosure statement is going to be a document that indicates the cost of borrowing. So again, it's going to be, we in the past, we called it the fixed credit disclosure statement. It's also known as the fixed credit cost of credit disclosure statement. And the reason it's called fixed in this case is because we have a set fixed rate. If it's a variable, or I would call it, if it's not a variable, but a line of credit, so a home equity line of credit, then this would be called an open credit disclosure statement. And so open credit is a little bit different in that it can be paid off right away. Fixed has a set term. So on these fixed credit disclosure statements, what we're showing again is the information about the client, the mortgage amount, the rate, and then in here, we're going to get into the term, the amortization, the payment. And this is where I start to kind of talk to the client about what's happening. The total interest paid over the term is the $26,000. Total cost of credit, so that's the interest paid plus any broker or lender fees. And this includes other fees too. And I'll go into what those are in a sec, but that's $27,000. The total payments over the 5 years, right? 5 years is $62,000. And the remaining balance at the end of the 5 years is $195,344. So that kind of gives the client a sense of what is happening in terms of interest paid, balance at the end. The first part, we talk about the cost of credit. So the total mortgage amount is the $230,800. Here's a list of any other fees, charges, and payments that are deducted from the mortgage amount by the lender. So these are the different things, nothing in this case. And for most regular prime lending files, there will be nothing typically deducted. The one thing that you will see here, sometimes, if you have an insured file, is it will indicate the amount of insurance. So if this was an insured file, you would see here that 4% insurance fee would be listed here. And so it would say total mortgage less the insurance amount from lender is this much. So that kind of gives you a sense that they actually will pull out the mortgage insurance. And then the next set of numbers is the value received by the borrower for proceeding with the transaction. So the total from the lender, so that would be this number up here. So again, we'd take whatever amount less any insurance or other fees that were deducted. And then we basically add all those things back. It's really weird. We've done a subtraction up top. We do an add back on this next section. And then that gives you a sense of the total value received. And then the last little bit is the value paid by the borrower for proceeding. So this was the value received. This is value paid. And this tells you about the total payments that the person's paying, the amount that's left at the end of the mortgage, at the end of the term, and any other fees that they may have incurred. So that in this case, we've got legal fees of approximately $1,000, title insurance, which is approximately $250, and any other fees that they may have paid. So we add all those things together. we look at the cost of credit. So that is the amount from that first page. If we go back here, total cost of credit. And if you do a funky calculation, which is very, very difficult to do, again, these are not the calculations that make sense in your head, but if you do a calculation of what this interest is over the amount of value that has been paid, you get this rate. And you'll see that this 2.604 is different than the 2.5 we had above. And that's because if you take together the interest that's paid, along with any of these other fees that the person has to pay, so title insurance, legal fees, if we look at all those together and we kind of break it out per year, the total interest cost of having that mortgage is 2.604, and that is considered to be the APR, the annual percentage rate. And that's just because some of those other things are lumped together in this calculation. The actual interest that the client pays is still 2.5, but this is a good way of explaining that when you lump together all the costs that it takes to get this mortgage, your average rate is 2.604. Again, signatures, last little bit talks about other charges that the client might pay. We sign it here, client signs, and that's the disclosure. So that, again, tells the client about what is the cost of getting that mortgage. So that's another document that I would include with the mortgage commitment. And another one that it gets included is going to be, so I'm going to go back here. And this is where it gets interesting, because I think this old form is going to be the old one. Yes, sir, it is.
I'm just going to ask you, Pete, what year these are from.
I know, right? So this is an old form. This is what the old Form 10 used to look like. And the most important thing to know from all this is that the new form is only one page, but this is what this Form 10 is essentially designed to disclose. The mortgage broker will not acquire a direct or indirect interest in the transaction. So we're trying to tell them that we're not doing anything other than putting the lender and the borrower together. And because of that, we get commissions. So that's what this part says. That's essentially what the Form 10 was designed to do. It was designed to disclose to the borrower what is it that we do as part of this transaction. Now, the new form will have that written out. And instead of having 3 pages, it's got 1 page, the very first kind of bulk of the paragraph, and I won't show you, but you guys get the sense, will describe how much White House Mortgages gets paid as part of that transaction. So that's the finder's fees and volume bonus. And then the second paragraph says how much you get paid as the sub-broker. So what's your percentage cut of that commissions? So that's those 2 documents. And then I will show you guys one last document, which I get the clients to sign. And that is, where is mine? So this was the old school. Again, you guys get all old school. So this was the old MPP document, mortgage protection plan. Again, here it shows you, again, same guy, birth date. Here's his cost of insurance. There's his cost of disability. And what's crazy is if anyone ever used MPP, you'll see that all these things change. So life insurance, it changed to twice per month. Cost almost stayed the same. This is why we went to our own insurance. And disability cost was, again, per month. And new MPP all is twice per month. So it gives you a sense of kind of that stuff. We don't actually have to ask any of these questions using White House insurances. So you don't have to ask the client to tell us about any of their medical issues. So that's great. So that's the insurance referral form. So you guys see that. I would put all those documents together in one big package. So commitment, if you haven't already got it, the client agreement, the cost of credit disclosure, the Form 10, and the mortgage protection insurance. Put all those together, and then you can send those together as a DocuSign package or as a essentially you can have the client come in and sign them in person. But that's really the bulk of the stuff. So we get those signed. Those then come back to us. Some of them get sent to the lender. So for instance, the mortgage commitment should be sent back to the lender. Lenders typically also want to see the cost of credit disclosure. So that disclosure form gets sent to the lender as well as any other additional documents that the client might have. So we've talked a little bit about the timing of this. So we get this kind of typically on a purchase during that subject removal period. So we'll want to make sure that everything is signed. And after the lender has received all this stuff, they will actually send you either a tick sheet, or they'll send you an update that says these things are still outstanding, or that everything is finished and checked, and sometimes they'll call it broker complete. So once it's broker complete, then you can let your client know that they can remove subjects. On a refinance, same kind of process. You're going to send stuff to the lender. Lender's going to approve and then check all those boxes. They'll then tell you that it's broker complete. So we talked about the timing of that. At that point, file will fund at some point. And once it's funded, you'll want to make sure that all these documents are together. I would highly recommend that you store them on your own device, but they also have to come to me in terms of compliance. So a big package like this. I haven't gone through the compliance checklist, so the checklist, the invoice checklist, but I'll go through that another time. But essentially it gives you a good sense of like the timing of the various documents when they go through. I don't know that there's necessarily anything that you have to do after the fact, but I think what we're going to do in maybe the next session is we'll talk about kind of getting the clients in, and then what we do after the fact, and what best practices are for files as they go through. That all sound good? I'm going to put this open to questions. Do you guys have any questions or even comments about the process, what works best for you? Yeah, any best practices from yourself?
Pete, I just had a question about that insurance referral form.
Yes.
Is that the only one then? Like if they waive the insurance, is there additional waiver form, or just that one form that we have to have signed?
So in terms of the waiver, so this one, I'll show you guys. Hang on. I'll show you the insurance form so that you guys can actually see it. It's very simple. Where are you?
Bobby Lee, are you asking if that satisfies like our requirement to offer insurance?
Yeah. Just that one form?
Just the one form.
Yeah.
The one form. Okay, so we don't have to have any, there's no other additional form, just the one.
Just the one.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Okay, here I found it. Okay, so this form here that you see on your screen, this is the one form. So as long as the client has signed here at the bottom, and they've indicated that either they like the insurance referral or that they decline it, as long as we have that, and as long as it is signed at the bottom, that's all we need. So just this one form.
Do we have to ask the client, like do we have to have a conversation with them about this form and then send it to them, or is it just kind of sent to them without talking to them?
I would talk to them.
Yeah.
And this is it. I'll tell you, you don't have to be an insurance advisor. The whole point of this form was to take that entire burden off of you. So what I would do is I would fill in the details here. So date, your name, mortgage amount, the amortization, what the monthly payment looks like. Client details, so just name, birthday, gender, phone number, email. You probably won't know if they're a smoker. So you could answer prefer not to say. If the client says that, you can say yes, you can say no. There's a few different options here, but you could leave this blank and let the client fill it in. But what I would do is I would say to the client this: indicate your smoking status, and if you want to have coverage for an insurance, that can be life insurance to pay off the mortgage. It can be life insurance to pay off not only the mortgage, but additional payment or additional amounts to be paid to your beneficiaries. If you want to have disability insurance for monthly expenses, or if you want to have critical illness in case you have a critical illness, so like something like cancer, then simply check the box that says, yes, I'd like someone to talk to me. That's all that this is saying. We have a team of Liz and Jesse. They're two licensed insurance people that this is exactly what they do for a living. They work on insurance alone, and they can have a conversation with the client. This keeps you out of any medical information. It makes it completely non-awkward, but a very quick question. So, do you want someone to chat with you about life insurance? This helps cover you in case you pass away. It provides money to your beneficiaries. If that's something that interests you, it's typically not very expensive compared to the mortgage. So I typically say, like you saw on that old insurance form, the life insurance was $18 a month. For some people that are getting insurance today, again, some of my younger clients, they're in, like, the cheapest I've seen is actually about $12 per month. So really, it's tiny amounts. But that's all I'll say is, if you want your beneficiaries to be covered in case you die or get sick or have an injury, have a chat with our people. They're not high pressure. They're absolutely not. And they'll just let you know whether it's worthwhile. And that's it. If they say yes, great. Jesse will give you a call. If they say no, fine, sign it, done.
And I think for most forms that we send clients, Jamie, it's always a good practice to discuss them with them and explain them and walk them through it. You don't want a client trying to decipher any of those documents on their own. Like, you know, for me, my own personal best practice is I set up an appointment. It's basically a signing appointment where I'm going to DocuSign them, or I'm going to send them by DocuSign or Adobe Sign just prior to our appointment. So that way they're not sitting there, you know, looking at them all day long, trying to figure out what they are. And I'll send just before. We'll get on the phone. I'll have them in my screen as well. We'll walk through, you know, in the exact same order, go over everything, and then we're all on the same page. They sign, I get them, and we're done. So you don't want to send anything that you're not ready to explain to somebody.
Yeah. And this is, again, another good opportunity for us as a group. If you're ever in a spot, and again, you'll check with me anyway, but if you're in a spot at the start of your career where you want to run through that process, the actual meeting, I will pretend to be your client and we can totally do this. You just let me know, send me the documents, we'll go through and you can explain it to me. And I think
highly recommend.
Yes. And what's crazy, and Brent and I, we talked a lot about this, but like, there's so many brokers that don't know what's in the commitment, because all they do is they just send it to the client, and it's like, no, this doesn't work. You have to know what's in the commitment. So you got to read through it. You've got to understand what's on the client agreement. Like, it's crazy that we never actually read through it, but we should. These are all things we need to know, because if a client's signing it, we have to be comfortable knowing what they're signing.
And the first few times you kind of run through them, don't stress, because you're gonna stumble on different parts, and that's why it's such a good thing to do it with Pete first. I know we went through documents numerous times in the past, and it lets you kind of work out the kinks of how you're delivering it to the client. Keep notes for yourself about the different sections, whatever you need to do. But yeah, you're not going to feel super confident because it's still foreign, well, to you as you start. It's a foreign document, so you know the explanation piece. Definitely practice it, and like I say, rely on Pete for that. He's awesome for kind of helping you explain things in terms that people understand. I mean, you could read through the document and it's still not in terms they understand. So you need to be able to kind of explain to them in kind of layman's terms and not industry terms.
I don't understand a lot of the shit that's put in some of the documents. Like those standard mortgage terms that are on a lot of those commitments, they're very wordy, right? Like I can bring them back up, but like there's stuff in there that you're like, I don't even understand why this is in there. But we can talk through it. So I've gone through enough of these to know why those standard mortgage terms are in there. But at first you'll look at them and it just doesn't make sense. So please let me know, because we can talk through. And what's crazy is if you try to go through the standard mortgage terms with the clients, this is not going to be a 19-minute meeting. It's going to be like a 19-hour meeting, because those standard mortgage terms, they'll take forever. So we've gotten to the point where knowing them as a broker is important, but letting the client know and saying, look, there's a series of these 23 standard mortgage terms that First National has. Feel free to read through them and ask me questions. That's it. That's all I do. Standard mortgage
Yeah.
terms, I don't go into them anymore because they're
Yeah, I
just
like that.
too
I like
wordy.
that idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Too wordy.
And you'll find as you go kind of ways that you can not necessarily take a shortcut with documents, but you're still going to explain everything as best you can, but make it less painful for somebody, because that's when their eyes kind of glaze over and they have no idea what's going on anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. My eyes glaze over, but even meeting,
Right at the
even
beginning of
meeting
this
with,
one.
yes, exactly. But yeah, meeting with Pete
Jamie.
today, like even the whole application process, it seemed so overwhelming. And then when I met with Pete today and he went through what I actually need to do, it's only actually half of what I thought that I had to do. So it is just going through the motions and getting used to it.
Jamie, don't worry. Most people's eyes glaze over every time Peter and I are talking anyways.
That's
It
true.
doesn't matter what it's about.
True. Bobby, what's your take on the standard mortgage terms? You've been lending for a bit. Tell me about what you do.
I usually just highlight the important parts like the property taxes, house insurance, the main points, you know, that they really need to worry about. And
Yeah.
I mean, I don't go over every bit of detail in them, that's for sure.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that those standard mortgage terms are going to be covered by the lawyer or the notary that goes through the closing process.
Yeah.
So for us to go through them, it's almost extremely redundant, because not only is it going to extend the time that we're spending with the client, but it's going to be gone over in better detail by the lawyer. So don't worry about it.
That's my go-to line.
Yeah.
Is your closing lawyer is going to go over this anyways. Read through if you like, ask me questions, but your lawyer is going to be going through this again. So, yeah.
Perfect. All right, so we've covered a lot today. We've talked a little bit. We haven't really talked too much about the lender, although I guess the lender side is we were talking about getting the mortgage commitment and kind of reading it, interpreting it, and using its details to fill in the disclosure and the Form 10. What's really cool, and I have to admit this is kind of the technology piece, is I've actually got Velocity working to the point where it's going to fill in everything within the disclosure statement. It's going to fill in everything on the Form 10, and it should do it all correctly. If for whatever reason you guys ever see something that's not filling correctly, let me know. But part of the thing that I've been trying to do is work in the back end to make sure that the program works given a bunch of parameters that I can input that are lender specific. So hopefully it works. If it doesn't, let me know.